Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about my own diet and the fact that I personally find, and I will say for people, this is not necessarily going to be true for everyone. I feel this works very, very well for me, and it works well for a lot of people that I know, and it's something I've observed over the years. And this was even popular all the way back in the 90s in uh, competitive bodybuilding. You had guys like John Perillo doing this who were like, look, just eat lots of carbs, keep your fat very, very low, and keep your training volumes high, and you will be able to train with much higher volumes. Okay? And he was talking not just lifting, but cardio and everything else. And what I have generally found when I've experimented around with my own diet, there's a degree of truth to this. And I'm someone who's messed with keto diets, very low carb diets, high fat diets. Something I personally invariably find, and I definitely noticed the trend when I did my lean bulk last year, that the more carbohydrate I eat, the more training I can do. And it goes way beyond just the data that we have on showing, you need X amount of grams, but I'm talking eating 10 times that amount. Anytime I try to eat large amounts of fat calories, I simply cannot train the same. I cannot train the same that I can on large amounts of carbohydrates. But when you look at a lot of athletes out there, you see this in most sports, right? You see it in most sports. In sports, this is well understood, right? This is well known in everything but the lifting world, that most athletes require very large amounts of carbohydrates. It's absolutely indicative of their performance is how many carbs they can eat. And the funny thing is that in most of these sports, they're actually, have the ability to burn more fat as fuel. But generally speaking, we still see carbohydrate being very, very dominant. And it absolutely determines people's work capacities. Well, when we get into the gym and we get into lifting, I've observed this over many, many years of rotating through different dietary practices. And what I usually find is that the larger percentage of my calorie intake that comes from carbohydrates, not only can I train with more volumes, my gains tend to be leaner. And we have a lot of scientific data on this, and people get really upset when you bring this up, but the data is there. We simply, as humans, are not storing dietary carbohydrates as body fat to any appreciable degree. And when we do, it is not subcutaneous. It's absolutely not subcutaneous. Generally speaking, what we find is that we store it as either glycogen, or most of it then gets dissipated as body heat. And then the other thing people bring up, well, what about too many carbs and insulin resistance? But that's not the case if you're then increasing training volumes and training loads, right? In other words, if you double your amount of training you're doing in the gym, or even increase it 50% because you are carb loading much, much, much higher, it doesn't contribute to insulin resistance. If anything, insulin sensitivity tends to improve. The reason we're seeing this concern always brought up over in the bodybuilding world is because of various exogenous substances that can be interfering with that. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but there's combinations of things that are creating potential insulin resistance as the doses go up. But when that is not in the equation, you don't find that to be the case. And when you go look at elite athletes who have very, very high energy turnovers, what do you see? Even though they might be eating thousands of calories from carbohydrates every day, their insulin sensitivity tends to be phenomenal. Why? Because they're burning through that much energy. They're creating the demand for it. Okay, and that is the big difference here. That's the big difference. So, when we start having these talks about lean gains or even burning body fat, people who have high energy outputs, high training volumes, if your primary focus is carbohydrate in your diet, you're going to be leaner. You're going to be leaner because you're burning through all these things. And it's actually possible at a certain point to where if your fat intakes are lower than the amount of fat that you're burning through, Even though we may be very carb dominant what we're burning, we're still burning some fat every day. That's where you can potentially see recomposition occur. Okay? We see recomposition occur in these cases where carbohydrates are kept very high, dietary fat is very low, and then training volumes are optimized around that. And this is, again, a point that needs to be made. Usually the reason we're having to increase fat to gain muscle is because people cannot get enough carbohydrate in. It becomes a limit to their intake, and therefore to gain weight, they need to add the dietary fat. But we need to be clear here. Dietary fat itself is not going to stimulate any muscle building hormones. Okay? And again, people will say, well, what about testosterone? Well, no, you're not going to manipulate testosterone enough through your diet to have these big benefits that you think you are. You're not. Okay? And again, when the concerns are some sort of dietary deficiency when calories are too low, it is not happening when you're eating large amounts of calories. Testosterone tends to go down when diet-related due to gains in body fat. Okay? But carbohydrates themselves are not storing as fat to a meaningful degree. So if anything, keeping fat too high, if you're gaining too much body fat from it, well, that's going to eventually do it. Now, in the context of most people training, that's not really happening, though. Okay, because if they're staying reasonably lean, we're talking American level obesity here. But we see that in a lot of strength circles and stuff. But back over to the point, you're not able to burn dietary fat as training fuel for any sort of high intensity training, which would include all resistance training. Okay, we're not talking about distance running here. We are talking about weightlifting or higher intensity cardio. Your carbohydrates are what you're burning for fuel. Carbohydrates also produce anabolic hormones that can help with recovery and with muscle growth. So again, we need to be very, very clear here that if you want to train with very high volumes of training, dietary carbohydrates are absolutely critical, and they should be the focus. And I have personally found an enormous difference, even on similar calories. When I'm eating 400 or 500 grams of carbs versus 200, versus, again, replacing those calories with fat, I can absolutely train with more volume consistently. And I've known plenty of other people in the same situation. Okay? And again, I'm not saying that applies to everyone, but there's definitely a trend towards it, right? And we need to be aware of that trend. But again, that's, going off of my experience, that of many other athletes and many lifters I know. And we see that in the real world repeatedly, right, in sports nutrition. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.